past, I would say, 5+ years, but especially in the past few years, the security levels of at least the leading so-called hyperscale cloud providers like us has increased dramatically. It was already quite high where security was built in and not necessarily bolted on after the fact, but it's kept increasing.
Hello and welcome to Washington Post Live. I am Tim Starks. I am the Cybersecurity 202 author here at the Washington Post. Today we're going to have two segments about protecting your money and data in a digital world. Later we will hear from Tom Robinson, who is the founder and chief science officer at Elliptic. But first we're going to hear from Phil Venables, who is the chief information security officer at Google Cloud. Phil, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So well, let's start by talking about the fact that it's going to come as no surprise to any of our viewers online that more and more of our transactions are happening online. Can you talk about the degree to which our economy has become digitized?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth taking a step back and thinking more broadly, and certainly most people in all of our lives, our entire lives have become more digitized every single day. And then behind the scenes, whether it's government, retail, energy, telecommunications, and also finance, more and more of our interactions with our financial institutions, whether it's our banks, our savings accounts, our brokerages, or payments, are all fully digitized. I think many of us probably don't recall the last time we went into a branch, and we're probably writing checks, if very infrequently, if ever. So everything part of our financial lives have become digitized, and I think it's been great for convenience, and in many respects has also been great for security, because some of the online mechanisms, despite some of the challenges on online security, are actually probably more secure than some of the old previous more kind of manual experiences.
Let's dip down into that a little further if we could. I was hoping you could talk us through some of the advantages and also some of the drawbacks and vulnerabilities of an increasingly digitized world, specifically as it relates to money.
Yeah, so I think, again, when you think about the perspective from a customer and how you interact with your bank or make payments, you're typically doing it from a mobile device, like a smartphone, or you're doing it from a laptop or a home computer. And so one of the things that's really important is to make sure that those devices are protected, they're kept up to date, they're appropriately configured, sticking with the secure defaults that the manufacturers advise. And in the case of, obviously, cloud services and things like we provide through Gmail and other things, making sure that you're following all of the recommendations and taking the defaults that we have spent a lot of time thinking about how to make sure that default level of security is there for your devices. And then increasingly, as you work with your financial institution, and again, most of the leading financial institutions think about this a lot, but making sure that your bank or your payments provider is offering things like multi-factor authentication. In other words, moving beyond simple and easy to breach passwords into stronger forms of authentication. And then also that you're paying attention and setting any alerts. So, for example, one of the things I do with all of my bank accounts and credit cards and payments is make sure I get an alert when some transaction happens above a certain threshold, so I can really make sure that the things going on are the things that I've authorized. And what you'll find is that most banks, most financial institutions actually provide these capabilities. And certainly if they don't, that's probably something for you to question, whether you should go to an organization that is focused on security.
So as consumers, when we're checking out online, we tend to value speed over having to keep inputting our financial information over and over again. What is the relationship between speed and security?
Well, it's a really interesting question, because sometimes, there's been a lot of commentary in various parts of the industry that security and convenience are often the opposite and contradict each other. Our experience, and certainly our experience with a lot of the customers we support, is that when companies are thinking about usability, convenience, security, efficiency, if you do security in the right way, these things can actually be quite efficient. And so a good example of that is some of the work we've been doing on devices, and some of the work has been particularly around Android, and particularly the work around some of the things in our Safer with Google program, and all of the settings for Gmail, all the stuff we do in Google Cloud is all about providing security measures that are easy to use, that blend into the background, that provide a high level of security without always getting in the way of what people want to do. And I think our experience is having a secure by default approach and having usable security that blends into the background can provide potentially even more convenience and effectiveness, as well as it being secure. So we certainly don't think those are odds. And in fact, a lot of the techniques we provide to our customers helps them construct similar things as well.
Bill, I'd like to ask you about your specific role for a moment. You took this job of Google Cloud Chief Information Security Officer at the end of 2020. It's not a role that existed before. Can you talk about what your job entails, and then what led to the creation of the role? What made it a necessary role at the time it became a reality?
Yeah, so while my role didn't exist before December 2020, there was certainly lots of people and lots of teams that clearly paid attention to security in the various different platform and products within Google Cloud and related businesses. But what we did in the creation of my role and my team was to bring even more focus across an array of things. So we've continued to focus very clearly on product security, making sure our products are delivered in secure ways, making sure that we're delivering on our compliance objectives, which is how do we evidence the controls that we have for various different regulated industries, as well as work on privacy to make sure that our products adhere to all of the privacy laws, regulations, and in fact, people's expectations of what privacy should be. One of the new things we did, though, as well, is we created this organization, perhaps not imaginatively named, that we call our Office of the CISO. And this is an organization full of former security officers from banks and telecom and energy and public sector and healthcare and various other industries that have spent a lot of time in the enterprise working on securing their enterprise. And we've brought them into Google Cloud to enable them to be a bridge between what we do at Google and what enterprises can do, and how do we get those enterprises to securely modernize themselves into the cloud. And so I think as the creation of our organization has done, we do all of the traditional things a chief security officer does, plus this really important means of interfacing with customers to help them in their digital transformations to get to a more secured by default state. And having that team of former security practitioners that have spent their lives in the enterprise and public sector side doing that is a great vehicle for us doing those things.
Yeah, this digitization of the economy that we've been talking about has been enabled by the cloud. It's been an integral part of that. I was hoping you could talk to me about the way the definition of the cloud has evolved, and then how should we understand the role of the cloud in our modern lives?
Yeah, so cloud provides an array of services. So in many respects, cloud started off as what you would call infrastructure as a service. It's just a basic means of running your technology rather than it being in your own data center. But over the past number of years, all cloud providers, and we like to think especially us, have built an array of solutions on top of that infrastructure that is everything from data analytics, the ability to efficiently manage and train machine learning and artificial intelligence applications, all the way through to a whole range of application development, secure software supply chain management capabilities, all built on a global network that's encrypted, has an immense geographic dispersion and a lot of capacity to deal with large numbers of potential denial of service and other attacks. So it's essentially a whole environment that can enable enterprises, small businesses, public sector organizations to really think how to modernize their technology and move it to a more inherently secure and resilient environment. In effect, it's driving that digital transformation. And so we spend a lot of time now with customers and with other organizations, helping them reimagine what they can do with a more modern infrastructure and a more modern application stack and a more modern set of data analytics tools that can really kind of drive their business and how they want to engage with their customers. And it's really, really enjoyable for us to take what we're building, what we've learned as part of the wider Google set of services, and bring that to more people in a secure, resilient, and reliable way.
You've described the cloud as a digital immune system. What do you mean by that? And what are the limits of the kind of security that we can have with the cloud?
Yeah, so one of the great things about cloud, and this is not just us, but we like to think we do a pretty good job of this, especially is every month we're pushing out hundreds of updates. And these could be new controls that we've decided we should implement for people's benefit. It could be controls that customers have asked us to build for them. It could be fixing vulnerabilities or other issues that we've discovered as part of our own vulnerability research or as part of the various bug bounty programs where external researchers notify us of things that we could improve. It could be informed by all of our threat intelligence, and increasingly we've even broadened our threat intelligence capability through the recent acquisition of Mandiant, which is just a great set of people and capabilities to give us that visibility. So all of this apparatus comes together and we provide these security updates. Now, for most organizations, what they can essentially do is sit back and take these updates, and it's like a rising tide lifting all boats. So even if an organization doesn't have a sophisticated security team, or even if they do, they're able to tap into this global ecosystem of this fast feedback loop that's continuing to improve security. And we think this is a genuine differentiator in the cloud that didn't really happen before in the traditional enterprise software, hardware, on-premise environment. This cycle time of increasing security faster and faster is what we have to do to enable to counter the threats that are also moving faster and faster. And this apparatus of cloud really helps us get that speed advantage.
Do you think it is inevitable that as more of our lives are online, that we're just always going to see more cyber attacks, more data breaches?
Well, so I like to describe myself as short-term pessimist, long-term optimist. And so I think there's a lot of issues the world still needs to work out. There's a lot of legacy technology out there where security wasn't designed in, and it's just been bolted on after the fact. And those things continue to get compromised. Whereas a lot of organizations are working hard to get them onto a more modern technical platform where the security has been built in by design. And so I think the more organizations do that, the better they're going to be. But there's a lot of organizations that are still in that transition state, and so we still see significant numbers of attacks of various forms out there, and the attackers are getting more sophisticated all the time, and so everybody has to do work to get themselves out of that vulnerable state. But the reason I'm long-term optimistic is many large organizations, including the cloud companies and including many other types of technology companies and many enterprises and government, are investing a lot more in the fundamental designs of how to make the infrastructure and our digital environment more secure by default. And so we're making it harder and harder for the attackers. So once everybody gets onto these more defendable architectures, I'm not saying there won't be attacks in the future, but we'll be making the attackers work harder, and we'll probably tilt the balance in our favor. So again, short-term pessimistic because there's a lot of work still to be done, but long-term optimistic because I think we're starting to make the right directional decisions on how to build a more defendable digital environment for the future.
Let's talk about who those hackers are. The threats to consumer data and financial information. Who generally are the hackers, and can you describe their most common method of stealing valuable information?
Yeah, so I would characterize it as two main groups. There are nation state hackers and organized criminal groups. Nation states have a multiple set of different objectives, whether it's from espionage or disruptive attacks to try and influence geopolitical events. But there also are nation states that are essentially funding large parts of themselves through ransomware attacks, through attacks on cryptocurrency exchanges, through attacks on payments networks. So there are nation states with, if you like, criminal motivations to steal and generate money. And then the organized criminal groups, of course, are very focused and in many respects quite sophisticated in how they think about identity theft, attacks, ransomware, a whole array of other things, breaking into payments networks and other things that can drive some revenue for themselves. I think a lot of the financial industry is very focused on this. The number of other organizations are, of course, we're very focused on profiling these threat actors, staying ahead of the threats, investing in controls that don't just mitigate specific attacks, but whole classes of attacks. And so again, what we do at Google, plus of course now with Mandiant, very good at profiling all of these different threat groups and helping our customers navigate through there. And again, as I mentioned before, the attackers are not standing still. They continue to evolve what they do in light of defensive measures. And our job and all of the other cloud providers' jobs is to keep innovating to stay ahead of those threats.
Would you say that the most common target is people's financial information? Is that what's most valuable?
Well, I think there's an array of things. So when you look at ransomware, for example, there's most of that is targets of opportunity. So in other words, the criminal groups or certain nation state groups will be scanning the internet looking for signs of vulnerability where they can exploit a weakness to implant ransomware, to then encrypt data, to then cause that organization to pay a ransom to free their data in the event that organization didn't have appropriately reliable backups. And in that sense, the ransomware actors don't really care who they're attacking targets of opportunity. There are some groups that specifically target. So again, if your objective is espionage, you're going to have a different set of targets than if your objective is financial gain. But financial gain, again, that is everything from stealing customer information from any organization that could reveal privacy information that could then be used as a means of performing identity theft or other types of access, or it could be trying to target payments and other environments to try and more directly steal money. But again, it's an array of tactics. I don't think things are just confined to financial services. It's across the board, whether it's a target of opportunity or a specific target for stealing information that could be used for other types of attacks.
What is the government's role, in your view, in protecting its citizens' data?
Well, so I think there's a couple of things. One, so government, just like every other organization, should focus on securing itself to protect the data it has for what public services do. I think also clearly in most countries, the government also has a job in providing the appropriate advice and support for enterprises that are within that country as well as those citizens. And so I think I can speak from a US perspective, although obviously there are many countries around the world that I think are doing a good job of this. But if you look from within the US, I think this administration has put in place a number of key roles and a number of very good people and a whole array of teams, whether it's in the Office of the National Cyber Director, the National Security Council, the National Security Agency, for example, their Cyber Collaboration Center that works with industry, all the way through clearly to what DHS and CISA are doing to drive not just things like the Cyber Safety Review Board. There's an effort that's called JCDC, the Joint Cyber Development Collaborative, which is about sharing information around threats and vulnerabilities. So there's a great degree of partnership between major companies and government agencies to collectively promote a stronger defense. And like a lot of people like to say, cyber is most definitely a team sport, and we all work as a team together across the public and private sectors. And then increasingly as well, I think government is doing a better job of communicating to the public in general about basic cybersecurity measures that everybody can take, like moving away from passwords onto stronger forms of authentication and a whole array of other techniques. And I think that partnership with government and the private sectors is going to continue to be essential.
The last question I have time to ask you about is, bluntly, do you see cash becoming obsolete?
It depends what you mean by cash. And so, I think that largely today, physical cash, I can't remember the last time I went to an ATM machine and like took out some physical cash, but every day my kind of life is moving cash, whether it's through credit cards or various digital payments to pay for things in either dollars or some other currency. I think that's going to be there for a long time going forward. Of course, whether there's ultimately a central backed digital currency is probably a whole question for a whole different event. But at least in the short term, I think national currencies are going to be the dominant form of payment. And in fact, one of the things that's great is seeing how much the central banks and the financial regulators work through the financial industry and with the technology companies to focus on how do we defend the digital economy. And I think they're collectively doing a pretty good job at that.
Giving us a suggestion for another event on the way out. Unfortunately, we are out of time, so we'll have to leave it here. Phil Venables, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Up next, we're going to hear from Tom Robinson of Elliptic after this segment, so please stay with us.
Hello and welcome. I'm Suzanne Kelly, CEO and publisher of the Cipher Brief, a national security-focused media publication. Today, we're here to talk about combating crime, and particularly cybercrime and fraud. And joining me to talk about this is Paul Fabara. Paul is Chief Risk Officer with Visa. Paul, welcome.
Thank you, Suzanne. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's nice to have you here. One can never be too careful today when it comes to their personal information, especially the way it's tied to making transactions online, like so many of us do. I thought we might start off by just getting an idea of what you think fraud and cybercrime looks like from your perspective today.
It's a great question. We are in a time that I personally haven't seen where you have this convergence between traditional fraud, cyber, and then AML type crime, all converging into the payments ecosystem. And so when you traditionally in the past had crooks that operated, bad actors that operated in silos, now they're operating in conjunction, they're operating in a highly coordinated manner, and they're going after anything within the payments ecosystem, irrespective of where you are in that service delivery chain. Whether you are a bank, issuing bank, whether you are a merchant acquirer, whether you're a merchant, payment facilitator. And so they're pretty much lurking anywhere across the payments ecosystem. And I think the pandemic has accelerated that, mainly because you had lots of customers that traditionally interacted in an analog way, in other words, brick and mortar, and now they're moving to digital themes.
Let's talk just a little bit more about that, because I think you hit on a really interesting point, which is how cybercrime has evolved over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's not the same world we're living in, is it?
Not at all. Not at all. As I said, I think the pandemic accelerated the convergence of clients and customers that normally interacted, as I said, in an analog way, now moving into e-commerce. And I think that brought a set of challenges for anyone in the payments ecosystem. Also, traditionally, you had fraudsters that specialized strictly on either stealing credentials or trying to get into your data packs to try to extrapolate as much data and put it in the marketplace for sale. Now you have, as I said, highly coordinated events where mainly DDoS attacks are sort of the flavor of the day now. In addition to lots of movement in the ransomware space. So I think the ecosystem has shifted dramatically.
We're hearing so much about AI these days and how it's going to change the way we live. I'm wondering, what role does AI play in fraud prevention?
It is one of the key tools that industry is using. We certainly use it all the time. In many ways, when you're looking for fraud, the way I describe it is you're looking for a needle in a haystack. Because out of possibly 10 transactions, you might have 9 that are false positives, and one that possibly could be a real fraud transaction. I think AI allows you, with all the power behind that, with the most current algorithms that the industry is utilizing, to try to look for that needle in the haystack. So I think it's critical that we continue to invest in techniques and technology that is related to AI.
One of the most serious things we focus on at the Cipher Brief is that public-private relationship. So I'm wondering how the public and private sectors are working together in your world to defeat cybercrime.
That's absolutely critical. That partnership, and it's a it's a two-way streak. Obviously, we draw quite a bit of information from them, as they do from us. And in order to keep a safe payments ecosystem, I think is a responsibility of any of the actors in there. And as I said, not necessarily just the whole entire service delivery chain, but also governments, law enforcement, and other players that at the end of the day can help us secure payments and to make sure that transactions between buyers and sellers continue to be safe.
I'm sure that myself, as well as everyone watching today, has been the victim of some kind of fraud on a credit card over their lifetime. So I'm really curious. I would love to ask you, what is Visa doing to prevent fraud and keep their customer information secure? It's a tough task these days.
Indeed, it is. But it's probably one of the most important things that we have across our network in terms of what we do day to day. Just to give you an example, Suzanne, over the past 5 years, we have invested over $9 billion in securing our network from a cybersecurity perspective. And we have spent well over $400 million in AI and high advanced techniques as it relates to data management. And so it is a day-to-day task. In addition to that, we have about 1,100 professionals that literally are monitoring our network on a 24/7 by 365. And over that, we have also what we call the Risk Operations Center, which essentially is another layer that sits on top of our network, looking for unusual patterns to make sure that at the end of the day, we can connect buyers and sellers, in a safe manner.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Paul Fabar, as Chief Risk Officer for Visa, I want to thank you for joining us today to talk a little bit about what Visa is doing to help prevent cybercrime, and then about, broadly, I think we have a better understanding just listening to the last few minutes. Thank you so much, Paul.
Thanks so much, Suzanne. I really appreciate it.
I'm Suzanne Kelly, CEO and publisher of the Cipher Brief. Now back to my colleagues at the Washington Post.
The cryptocurrency world is reeling after the meltdown of one of its most popular trading platforms.
Welcome back. And for those of you just joining us, welcome to the Washington Post. Welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm Tim Starks. I'm the author of the Cybersecurity 202 newsletter. I'm now joined by Tom Robinson. He is the chief scientist and founder of Elliptic. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Morning. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. There's obviously a lot going on in the crypto world right now, and I do want to get to that news, but I think it would help if you started by talking about what Elliptic is and what your role is there.
Yeah, so we're a blockchain analytics company, and that means that we track cryptocurrencies on the blockchain, and in particular, we track illicit use of crypto. And so we work with financial institutions that have engaged with crypto, and we help them to meet their anti-money laundering and sanctions compliance obligations. But we also work with law enforcement agencies and help them to trace proceeds of crime in crypto and bring those cyber criminals to justice.
FTX, the major cryptocurrency exchange founded in 2019, declared bankruptcy late last week. Before we get into the hundreds of millions of dollars that have disappeared from FTX, can you just break down for our viewers what exactly has happened? And because this is a developing story, what do we know and what don't we know about what's going on?
So FTX is one of the largest crypto exchanges in the industry. We don't know exactly what's taken place, but it looks like those operating the exchange committed fraud and misappropriated customer deposits. One thing I want to emphasize, though, is that FTX is not crypto. What we're seeing here is a failure of a business that was operating in the crypto industry. We're not seeing here a failure of crypto itself. The Ethereum, Bitcoin blockchains are continuing to operate exactly as intended. What we have here, it looks like, is fraud conducted by a specific business. So I think as the dust settles, we'll see exactly what happened within FTX. But in the meantime, it has filed for bankruptcy. And as you mentioned, it appears that amongst the chaos of the bankruptcy proceedings, there may have been a hack and a theft of funds from FTX.
Yes, crypto, there is the potential, despite what you said about a ripple effect, it seems. Crypto broker Genesis Trading said yesterday that they were halting withdrawals at their lending unit. They were blaming unprecedented market turmoil in the wake of the FTX collapse. Are we seeing some sort of contagion effect, and where or how do you see this going?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a credit crunch within crypto. As I understand it, FTX was borrowing a large amount of crypto from various industry players, and its bankruptcy is obviously having knock-on effects. But again, this could happen in the traditional financial system. In fact, it has to a certain extent in the past. I don't think there is anything inherent in cryptocurrency technology specifically that led to this. Where I think the crypto industry has differed a bit from traditional finance is relatively lax regulation. So there have been significant efforts over the past few years to crack down on illicit finance in crypto, but I think there haven't been enough efforts to ensure consumer protection within this industry.
I'm definitely going to ask you more about that in a moment. The thing I wondered was whether you see there's what's happened and then there's the perception of what's happened, and I'm curious if you think that what's going on will have any lasting effect on consumer confidence in cryptocurrency.
I think it absolutely will. I think this is a big hit for the cryptocurrency industry, and it'll take a long time to recover. But personally, I still have the same confidence about the underlying technology and its potential to revolutionize finance. We have been through incidents like this in the past. I think the perception with the industry is that a lot of the bad actors had been cleared out of the industry. But obviously the events last week show that that's not entirely the case.
A few days ago, you were quoted in the Washington Post saying that your company Elliptic had tracked 663 million that had moved from FTX. Has that number changed since then? And do we have any more clarity on what happened to it? Was it stolen? If so, by whom?
So it looks like there were significant outflows from FTX last week. Some of those were authorized transactions and related to the bankruptcy proceedings and FTX simply securing its remaining assets. However, it also looks as though there were some unauthorized transactions, and that's something that FTX themselves have acknowledged. They have said that they've notified law enforcement agencies about this. And this kind of concurs with what we've seen on the blockchain. So on Friday evening, we noticed some large crypto transactions out of FTX's wallet, and they began to exhibit some of the characteristics of what we see when a large theft has happened, when a hack has happened. So, for example, a lot of these assets were sent through decentralized exchanges in order to convert them into other assets. And that's something we very commonly see with large hacks, because the hacker is trying to avoid seizure of the stolen assets. And so if, for example, they've stolen stablecoins, those stablecoins can be frozen by their issuers. However, if they convert the stolen stablecoins into an asset such as Ether, Ether isn't issued by any central party, and therefore it's not possible to seize or block those funds. So it looks as though that's what we're seeing here with these funds from FTX.
What role do blockchain bridges play in the ability of hackers to steal, and how can those companies better prevent this kind of thing from happening?
Yeah, so a blockchain bridge is a service that allows you to move crypto assets from one blockchain to another. And it's part of the decentralized finance, or DeFi, ecosystem. So DeFi is a movement where centralized intermediaries such as cryptocurrency exchanges are being replaced by smart contracts that run on a blockchain such as Ethereum. So when funds are sent through one of these bridges from one blockchain to another, they are stored in cryptocurrency wallets. And these bridges have become extremely popular, and billions of dollars worth of cryptocurrency are being held in those wallets. And so those are huge honeypots for hackers. And the technology behind bridges is relatively immature, and bugs have been found within them, and hackers have exploited that. So over the past few years, billions of dollars have been stolen in this way. And in particular, many of these hacks have been very strongly linked to the Lazarus Group itself, believed to be part of North Korea's cybercriminal activities. So it looks as though nation states are exploiting these bugs in cryptocurrency services in order simply for financial gain.
Let's return to the subject of regulation that you brought up earlier. Companies like yours can act like a buffer against some of these illicit behavior in the market. But can you talk about the need for regulation from governments for this industry, and what should that look like?
Yeah, so as I said, the way we help is to prevent money laundering and sanctions evasion in cryptocurrency. And I believe that has had a transformative effect on the industry. It's much more difficult for cyber criminals to cash out their illicit gains in crypto these days than it was, say, a few years ago. I think the big regulatory gap, though, has been around market conduct, prudential supervision, consumer protection, and that's been borne out with what we've seen with FTX. And so I think regulators need to address these issues, and it needs to be done on a global level. So we are starting to see progress. For example, the MiCA regulations that are coming online in the European Union are addressing many of these concerns. But if they're going to be effective, there need to be similar regulations in place globally. Because what we're seeing in a lot of cases is crypto businesses using regulatory arbitrage to base themselves in a jurisdiction where there is relatively little regulation, but then offer their services globally. So it needs to be better regulations in each jurisdiction, but there also needs to be global coordination as well.
You mentioned Europe. Is there a country or region that is getting this right at this time on the regulatory front? And what are they doing? What are they doing that is right?
Yes, so as I said, the MiCA regulations in the European Union go beyond illicit finance risks and do consider things such as consumer protection. One of the specific things that is in those regulations is, for example, preventing a crypto exchange from engaging in proprietary trading alongside operating an exchange. And that's something we saw with FTX, for example. There's obviously a clear conflict of interest there. And so, yes, I think probably the European Union is leading the way here.
Another concern about cryptocurrencies is where they can possibly end up. How are countries like Russia and Iran, which are facing international sanctions, using cryptocurrencies as a way to get around some of those sanctions? And starting with Russia, can you tell us what you've seen in that regard since the start of the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, so we're seeing crypto used in Russia in a number of ways. So first of all, some militant groups in Russia-controlled areas of Ukraine are using crypto for fundraising. So this is actually done by Ukraine as well early on in the conflict, but they're looking for crypto donations to help support their war efforts. We're also seeing on a relatively small scale so far, but some high-level Kremlin officials starting to use cryptocurrencies or experiment in using cryptocurrencies in order to bypass banking restrictions. So it potentially provides an alternative way of moving money out of Russia.
What about Iran? How are they using cryptocurrencies to their advantage?
Yeah, so this is particularly interesting. So Iran has really embraced cryptocurrency mining. They have instituted a licensing regime for cryptocurrency mining, and I think potentially sanctions evasion is a motivator for this. So Iran has obviously huge natural resources, but they are prevented from monetizing those on the international markets because of trade embargoes. So one thing they can do, instead of exporting and selling their energy resources, one thing they can do is generate electricity using them, and then use that electricity to mine cryptocurrency and receive cryptocurrency revenues in that way. So it enables them to overcome those trade embargoes and monetize their natural resources without actually having to move those natural resources out of the country.
So who on a more granular level, if I could ask, we've talked about Iran, we've talked about Russia, you mentioned North Korea. Who are these hackers precisely that are focusing on stealing crypto? Are they a part of the government? Are they non-government organizations, some kind of blend?
Yeah, so the Lazarus Group seems to be a sort of semi-independent group of hackers that are nevertheless extremely tightly linked to the North Korean state. They sometimes operate from outside of the country, but it seems to be that all of their activities are for the benefit of North Korea. And so we've seen them engaged in ransomware, for example, the WannaCry ransomware attack from 2017. But more recently, I think they've realized that the lowest hanging fruit out there is hacking cryptocurrency services and stealing cryptocurrency. And so they have been involved in several hacks over the past few years, and they've stolen several $1 billion in crypto.
That's what I was wondering, is if it was just a target of opportunity or if there was some specialized skill that North Korean hackers were bringing to this. What is it that makes them such a prolific actor in this space?
I think they've simply identified it as the biggest opportunity out there, and so have developed their skills to match that opportunity. I think in general, I think we've seen a bit of a pivot of cybercriminality away from things such as ransomware towards exploiting the crypto space. And again, I think that's just because of the amounts of money that are hanging around it in wallets out there, and for the taking, if they can work out how to exploit that. They can work out, for example, the bugs in a centralized crypto exchange or a DeFi service. As I said, a lot of these technologies are relatively immature. People make mistakes in the code, and those mistakes can be exploited in order to steal these funds.
I know you discussed how your level of confidence in cryptocurrencies being relatively stable. One of the sales pitches we've heard about cryptocurrencies is that their decentralized nature makes them less vulnerable to theft than money in your bank account. Is it more or less if you're comparing those two kinds of currencies?
So I think with FTX, what happened was people were entrusting their cryptocurrency to a central party, a cryptocurrency exchange, and that trust was misplaced. And I think that the true promise of crypto is that you don't need to rely on those kinds of intermediaries. You can instead have full control of your own assets, hold your money in a crypto wallet that only you control, and yet you can still have access to financial services. And that's kind of the idea behind DeFi, decentralized finance. So there, for example, you might be able to replace a centralized business such as FTX with a decentralized exchange such as Uniswap, which operates through smart contracts on a blockchain. So I think that removes some of the custody risk. There is nobody there who can steal your money. However, you are exposed to other risks. As I said, this is still relatively immature technology, and there is the risk that there are bugs or flaws in these systems which can be exploited by hackers.
It's been such a prolific year for these kinds of hacks on cryptocurrency. What do you think it will take at the very end of the day to make that stop or at least slow significantly? We talked about regulation. Are there other things?
I think you need to make it difficult for the criminals to be able to cash out. I think there's been a lot of progress in this area over the past decade, but these funds are being stolen because they're able to convert the crypto back into fiat currency at some point and therefore profit from their crimes. I think you need to impose regulation on those gateways between crypto and the traditional financial system and make sure that proceeds of crime can't flow from one to the other.
Is it going to take an act of Congress on those regulation fronts, or are there things that we can see agencies that have oversight in this area, which I guess is one of the problems? Are there things that these agencies can do, existing authorities, or do they need Congress, or is it perhaps both?
So in terms of consumer protection and market conduct, I think we need new legislation. We need a new regulatory framework that encompasses the crypto industry and takes account of the specific characteristics of cryptocurrency, both the benefits and the risks that it poses. So yes, I think something similar to the MiCA regulation in the European Union is probably required in the United States as well.
That's something we'll definitely be watching and reporting on at the Post. Tom Robinson, we are unfortunately out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks to all of you for joining us as well. To check out what interviews we have coming up, please head to WashingtonPostLive.com. That's where you can find out information about all of our upcoming programs. And I'm Tim Starks. Thanks so much for watching.